I love to learn. I've always loved school. I was one of those crazy kids that just looked forward to September and cried the last day in June. I love to read. I love to travel because for me that's another way of learning. Now I have to admit that some lessons are harder to learn, and we all have had those moments when we've thought, gee, I'd really rather not be learning this particular lesson at this particular time. But as we used to always say to our kids, you can always make mistakes, just don't make the same one twice. Learn from what you did the first time and try to avoid that calamity the second time. Yet I must admit that as I've reflected over this theme, and Reverend John and I have gleaned some of these themes for the next few Sundays out of our own children's Sunday school curriculum called A Joyful Path. And within it, this whole subject about lifelong learning, I've never really thought of it in terms of living a way of life that is faithful. To think that to be open to learning all the time is a faithful thing to do. And the Joyful Path curriculum that we share with our children says, lifelong learning is the spiritual path, the spiritual life that involves so much more than the classroom learning we are all familiar with. It's about keeping our hearts open to the spirit and truth that guides us throughout our lives. So it's about that spirit of openness that we are always willing to look at things in a new way. Jesus was always asking questions. He was always challenging the status quo. He was always asking folk to open their eyes and see themselves, one another, and the world with new eyes. I happened to be watching a documentary on the art collection of the British royal family recently, and I learned that they have over 600 sketches in their collection attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. And many of them were some of his sketches of anatomy, and internal organs, heart, womb, uterus, all sorts of things that for his time, people would be very unfamiliar with any of the workings, the internal workings of the body. Many of them were scientific in nature as he drew drawings of these organs and how they were designed, his observations. And sometimes his observations were in fact contrary to what the educated minds of his day believed to be true. So Da Vinci is actually quoted to have said, "Never trust authority, only nature." So I thought that was very interesting because obviously in the authority of his day, he recognized were not always correct because of the observations that he was making with his own eyes. And they would sometimes contradict both the scientific or the religious community of his day. A phrase I often find myself saying, and you may have muttered it a few times as well, you live and learn. You live and learn. Whenever you have one of those moments when what I believe to be true is actually proven false or incorrect, and kind of like the GPS on my car, my brain's store of solid fact or truth has to be rerouted to incorporate this new knowledge or awareness. I think it's so important to keep our minds open, to think outside of the box, to be willing to change our path and neural thinking ways as we incorporate new ideas or perspectives and points of view. There's been a lot of research done recently, and certainly because of my husband's Parkinson's, we've read a lot about the brain and how it functions, and there's a great deal of information out there about the neuroplasticity of our brains, that when one part of our brain is damaged or shut down, there are ways of recreating new paths to make your body and your mind work better and more efficiently, or in some ways to improve from what it had been before. So that whole concept of the neuroplasticity. So as we are looking at these different themes, I came across this video that I'd like to share with you this morning. So let's take a look at this, and it speaks about being a student of Christ as people of faith. So we'll give it a go here, and put your hand up if you can't hear it once it starts, and we can put the volume up. This is Matthew Meyer Bolton on the subject of study.
Well, for me, the word study, the root of it is studere, which means to be diligent or to be ready. So it's paying attention, it's looking around, it's listening, it's using everything you've got to take in the world and then reflect on it and learn from it. So it's, we tend to think of study as focusing on books or libraries or classes, and certainly that's an important part of it. But I think there's a curriculum all around us all the time if we want to take the time and tune in. We can learn if we look for it, if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. The word disciple means student. And so if you're a disciple of Jesus, you're a student of Jesus, but that doesn't mean just in a narrow sense, listening to words that Jesus reportedly said, but listening around you to Jesus every day, every place, in everyone, looking for him, listening for him as the teacher, you as the student in everything you do. I'm a relatively new parent, new father, so I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. When my 5-year-old, his name is Jonah, when he was 2 years old, he and I were at this coffee table in our living room. It's kind of an innocent, ordinary day. And we're drawing pictures and coloring, so he would ask me to draw something, and I would give it back to him, and he'd color it in. So in those days, he loved banana men, okay? So it was a banana with sunglasses. That was a banana man. And it was just past the 4th of July, and he had had his first experience of fireworks. And so he talked about fireworks as Big Boom. So it was banana men and Big Boom. So I would draw a banana with sunglasses, and then he'd color it in. Then I'd draw, a kind of firework, and then he'd color it in. And then I had this idea. I said, Jonah, what if we did a banana firework? And this idea, this prospect was too much for his 2-year-old frame to handle. He lost it. He started to dance. He started to smile. He started to laugh. He did this little jig all along the side of the coffee table, and his legs, his little 2-year-old legs, got caught up in one of the legs of the coffee table, and he fell. The front tooth, the right front tooth, his little baby tooth, caught the corner of the table as he went down, and I still remember that little white thing. It was like a little white hockey puck skittling across the hardwood floor all the way to the fireplace. And here I am, young father, parent on duty, mom's not even there. I swoop, pick him up, carry him into the bathroom, sit him on the counter, waiting for blood and tears. There wasn't much blood, and there wasn't very much crying either. He was looking at me, and he was stunned more than anything else. He wasn't sure what had happened to him. He was in some pain, but it was more that he was kind of astonished and amazed. And I kind of looked at him. I sat him up on the counter so I could see his face. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, "Big Boom." And I said, "Big Boom." And he said, "Big Boom." I said, "Yeah, Big Boom." We went back and forth like this several times, and it dawned on me that what he was doing is he was making sense of his experience, what had just happened, in terms of the available knowledge that he had at his disposal. So he knew about the fireworks, and we were drawing the Big Boom, so he figured that somehow his loss of a tooth was a result of some kind of a banana Big Boom, and that made good sense to him. So, I'm not going to argue with that. We talked it through. I kind of stroked his head. We had a conversation about Big Booms. I went and got the tooth and showed it to him. So anyway, I'm thinking about that later, and I thought that a lot of our knowledge, what we think of as knowledge about God, is like that. It is making sense of our experience with the available knowledge that we have at our disposal. And it makes sense to us, and it makes good sense to us. But there's so much more that Jonah has to learn, even now, and certainly as a 2-year-old sitting on that counter, there's so much more. I can see there's so much more for him to learn. He will learn about teeth. He will learn about holding your balance or losing your balance and losing a tooth as a result. He'll learn about dentists. He'll learn about dentistry, brushing your teeth. He'll learn that his mother spent a year in Haiti when she was in her 20s hosting dental delegations because lots of folks in the countryside of Haiti, just a few miles really from the United States, the richest nation the world has ever known, there are many people in the countryside of Haiti that don't even have toothbrushes, never mind dental care. He'll learn that too. And as he learns, he'll have to unlearn other things that he learns. He'll unlearn that he should be afraid of dentists, or he'll unlearn that the world is a fair and just place. He'll have to unlearn that so he can learn new things. And I think the walk of discipleship is like that. It struck me, that image, that story sticks with me as an icon of discipleship, that you're constantly learning and unlearning. And what is helpful to you today, you may have to let that go tomorrow. And so it's making sense of that. We need a guide. It's such a complicated terrain. There's so much we don't know. We need some kind of a guide, some kind of a teacher. And that's, for Christians, Jesus, the rabbi. He is Lord. He is the Son of God. He is also the teacher who takes you by the hand and helps you to make sense of the world with the knowledge that you have at your disposal, and then challenges you when the time is right to let certain ideas go so that you can embrace new ideas and embrace the world in a larger and broader way. That's the human way. That's being a disciple. That's being me. That's being you. That's who you're called to be, is that kind of a student, like a snake shedding its skin, constantly growing, constantly renewing, like a gymnast learning a new move, always moving up to different levels of difficulty, letting go of some of the old training so that she can embrace the new training and become more limber, more flexible, more graceful.
I think that just struck such a note for me. It resonated with this concept of lifelong learning. It's about learning new things, but it's also about unlearning things at times as well. It sometimes is about letting go of preconceived notions or presumptions about ourselves or one another. While at the Festival of Homiletics in Washington, D.C., Reverend John and I had the chance to hear Father Richard Rohr speak several times. And in one lecture, he commented that we still think and act like early church Christians. Remember that, John, when he was talking that way? And he was highlighting the fact that we still have so much to learn. Then I read today's post from Rohr's Center of Contemplation that we often post on our website. And I'd like to finish on that particular article this morning, and it's called The Mind of Christ, which I think speaks to this subject of lifelong learning and how to be faithful. We need to be open to new perspectives and wonder as we grow and mature as disciples of Christ. We can always learn something new if we meet the world with our eyes, hearts, and minds open. Richard Rohr writes the following: God created each of us with particular gifts that we can discover and use in the service of co-creating a more whole and loving world. There are many parts of the body of Christ. I am only one part, he writes, a mouth. When I first began to teach, no one was more surprised than I was that some people valued what I had to say. If I am able to speak well, it is only because somehow by grace, God has helped me get my false self out of the way. And when we are centered in our true self, we are most in touch with our creative source and most open to be a conduit of love. Fidelity to contemplative practice over months, years, and even a lifetime opens our hearts and minds and bodies to the ongoing creative flow of spirit. From our experiences of contemplation, union with love, we can then live and work in ways that are more compassionate and healing. We humans are creatures of habit. Our brains are wired to think the same thoughts again and again, like a broken record at times. Most of these habitual thoughts are dualistic and negative, We are obsessed with labeling things that are good or bad, right or wrong. Only very rarely do we change our minds about these predetermined, fixed assumptions. Obviously, this limits our ability to be creative and think outside of the box. In contemplative practice, we refuse to identify with any one side. My little personal note here, that's sometimes hard to do, particularly in times of political unrest. And yet, while still maintaining our intelligence and ability to think critically, we must refuse to identify with only one side. We hold the tension of seeming conflicts and paradoxes, going beyond words to pure, open-ended experience, which has the potential to unify contradictions. This is a creative tension because when held with loving intention, something utterly new and creative can emerge. Authentic and full knowing is subject to subject through a process of mirroring, seeing, and being seen, observing reality as it is. This is the mind of Christ. It really is a different way of knowing, and you can recognize it by its gratuity, open-endedness, compassion, and by the way it is so creative and energizing in those who will allow it. Truly, great thinkers and creatives take for granted that they have access to a different and larger mind. They recognize that a divine flow is already happening and that everyone can plug into it. In all cases, it is a participative kind of knowing, a being known through and not an autonomous knowing. This is how we can become co-creators with our loving Creator. So it seems to me that it's about keeping our hearts open to that spirit and truth that guides us throughout our lives. It is walking hand in hand with Jesus, seeing the world through his eyes, being open, be willing to change perhaps some of our previous conceived notions or ideas. And I love the imagery in the video that so often panned to children walking through a garden and observing the world around them. It's almost as if we have to become a little more childlike again in our view of the world, in our openness and our wonder and our awe and our hopeful and positive ways of looking at the world. May it be so as we continue to live and learn as Jesus taught us. Amen.